Welcome to the Neuromodulation Podcast, presented to you by the International Neuromodulation Society. Dive into the forefront of today's emerging neuromodulation techniques, insights, and ethical and clinical applications. Subscribe now to join the multidisciplinary collaboration of medical care providers, scientists, and engineers who are part of the global conversation that's shaping the future of healthcare.
We are incredibly excited to welcome Professor Konstantin Slavin to the show today, as he has just begun his tenure as INS president. For those watching this show live today, we will jump into the video interview after this brief introduction to his work. Dr. Konstantin Slavin is professor, chief of section, and fellowship director for stereotactic and functional neurosurgery in the Department of Neurosurgery at the University of Illinois at Chicago, UIC. Professor Slavin graduated from medical school in Baku, Azerbaijan in the Soviet Union and completed his neurosurgery residency in Moscow. He then completed his second neurosurgery residency at UIC and a fellowship in functional and stereotactic neurosurgery at Oregon Health Sciences University in Portland, Oregon. Dr. Slavin is current president of the International Neuromodulation Society and past secretary of the North American Neuromodulation Society. He's also the immediate past president of the World Society for Stereotactic and Functional Neurosurgery and the past president of the American Society for Stereotactic and Functional Neurosurgery. For many years, he was an executive committee member of the Joint Section on Pain of the American Association of Neurological Surgeons and Congress of Neurological Surgeons. Dr. Slavin has published in many books and peer-reviewed journals and is an associate editor or editorial board member for a number of publications, including Neuromodulation, Technology at the Neural Interface, Neurosurgery, Brain Sciences, Stereotactic and Functional Neurosurgery, Acta Neurochirurgica, and others. He is also the current editor-in-chief of Progress in Neurological Surgery. His first book on peripheral nerve stimulation was published in 2011. Another book, co-edited with Sam El-Jamel on neurostimulation, practice, and principles, came out in 2013. The third of his works, Stimulation of Peripheral Nervous System, The Neuromodulation Frontier, was released in 2015, and his most recent book on neuromodulation for facial pain came out in 2021. Links for all of his works will be found in the show notes. We will undoubtedly have the opportunity to welcome Professor Slavin onto the show throughout his presidency to delve into his expertise in the field. But today's episode is dedicated to giving you a sense of the man behind the president title, from his current neurosurgical practice and interests in innovation and research to his approach to leadership and INS programming for the 3 years ahead. Welcome to the show, Dr. Slavin.
Thank you for having me, Mandy.
Can you tell me a little bit about the landscape of your career right now? You're going to be coming in as president. What else are you doing right now?
I'm staying busy. I'm a neurosurgeon, so the majority of my life is actually neurosurgery. So I involved in a full-time clinical practice, working in the Department of Neurosurgery, University of Illinois at Chicago. I'm also current president of World Society of Stereotactic and Functional Neurosurgery. And it just so happens that my term of presidency in the World Society will finish in September of this year. So we'll be perfectly fine in terms of starting the presidency of International Neuromodulation Society. I feel that those two societies are very much complementary, and by virtue of being president of both of them in sequential fashion, I feel that I can probably cross-pollinate the fields by bringing some expertise from one field into another and back. The society work takes some of time during my daily or weekly routine, but still it's secondary to the ongoing clinical practice. I enjoy working with my colleagues on a variety of different projects, including some organizational work for the society. And right now, over the last few months, the biggest, time-consuming and energy-consuming effort was putting together a scientific program from this conference in Vancouver, which I expect to be a remarkable event covering the entire neuromodulation field through the worldwide representation and going pretty much through every topic that we have.
Tell me a little bit more about your practice. Your focus is in neuromodulation. What sorts of procedures are you working with regularly?
The neurosurgery is a complicated field. As you can imagine, we're dealing with a whole bunch of different conditions affecting nervous system, cranial, spinal, peripheral. And as such, the neurosurgery has multiple fields contained in it. The area of my specializations is a functional neurosurgery, stereotactic and functional neurosurgery that deals with the treatment of what is called functional conditions. And that covers chronic pain, movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease or essential tremor, dystonia, epilepsy, psychiatric conditions. So everything that, at least in the past, was thought not to have any anatomical substrate. So the functional disorders are different from many other things neurosurgeons deal with in a way that most of the time they are not life-threatening. They're remarkably disabling and they are very much affecting quality of life of our patients. But by virtue of being chronic and debilitating in many ways, the different surgeries have been established over these years or even centuries. The functional neurosurgeons have a large armamentarium of interventions, and that's what I do in my daily life. They treat patients with chronic pain, movement disorders, epilepsy, psychiatric conditions. Neuromodulation is a big part of it. It's not the only thing I do, but in the spectrum of interventions that I offer my patients, neuromodulation has been a large part ever since I started my neurosurgical career. It has become more prevalent with advancement in technology, with understanding of mechanisms, with better regulatory approvals. But even now, it is still just a part of everything else I do for my patients. I'm enjoying the fact that I'm being on forefront of the neuromodulation for the last 25 or 30 years. It's hard to imagine, but it will be 36 years since I finished medical school. And I can tell you that over this time, this specialty has advanced tremendously. And the fact that I was able to bring up something new to the field and lead the societies that dedicate themselves to this particular part of neurosurgery and neuromodulation is definitely a very honorable task.
So if we travel back in time, what led you to brain surgery?
There are many different ways to explain this type of attraction, but most of it was rather serendipity. When I was a medical student, I tried to learn more about practical applications of this, and I was moonlighting as a nurse in a nearby hospital, and just so happened that not far from where I lived opened a brand new neurosurgical hospital. So working there in an intensive care unit made me better understand what is happening, and immediately fell in love with the entire field. By that time, I already knew that I am more gravitating towards the surgical part of medicine, so I knew I will be a surgeon. But neurosurgery was one of those revelations that you have early on, when you realize that this matches your personality the most. And thankfully, started the line in the right way, and I was able to do neurosurgical residency and have been doing it ever since.
And you said that neuromodulation has been part of your career since basically the start of your neurosurgery journey. How did you come across neuromodulation? Is it something that's taught about in school, or was that also serendipity?
No, that's actually even more interesting, because when I was in medical school, neuromodulation was still in very, I would say, embryonic stages. There were not that many devices available. The procedures were done in very few centers worldwide. And when I was learning about this, just getting first initial exposure, that was more of the science fiction world, when we would implant some electrical devices that would affect the person's function. And as I graduated from my training and started practicing, and even during the fellowship, the neuromodulation was a part of a much larger world of functional neurosurgery. So to put first stimulators and try to see some effects on the patient's pain or movement disorders, and then watch this technology mature and becoming ubiquitous in common practice, that's what I think made it even more attractive. I've been giving talks about history of neuromodulation, tracing essentially my experience with that from late 80s and early 90s. And I can tell you that what we're using now and take it for granted obviously was not available when I started. To have this much wider availability and acceptance of our approaches by itself is very rewarding. About 10 years or so ago, I was president of American Society of Stereotactic and Functional Neurosurgery. And then upon completion of my term, I got involved with the World Society and went through the ranks and culminating in presidency. So the presidential term for World Society is almost over now. And I'm very excited to see that my successors are even more qualified and more determined to bring our field to the newer heights.
As the incoming president of the International Neuromodulation Society, can you tell me a little bit about the vision that you have for your presidency?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking this, because the International Neuromodulation Society, at the time when I'm taking over the presidency, is a mature organization which has grown from a small group of enthusiastic practitioners to a worldwide entity that has chapters in most countries of the world and has been on forefront of the entire field for last, I won't say almost 3 decades. The society has matured and grown through a better understanding of its goals, purposes, and main players, because right now the goals of society are many, and those include both assurance of access to neuromodulation modalities throughout the world, expansion of indications and creation of evidentiary base for everything we do, collaboration with colleagues from other specialties, and promotion of the modalities across the spectrum, as well as collaboration with technological innovation in the field, which has been a big part of the entire progress in our area.
What challenges do you anticipate in the role?
Fortunately or unfortunately, the dynamic of our field is such that we are constantly questioning ourselves whether what we do makes a lot of difference for our patients. As practitioners, there's no doubt in our mind that everything we do helps, and helps rather tremendously. The improvement in quality of life that we see in our patients is overwhelming, that any doubt about effectiveness of the modality or its value for the patients, for their families, for the society at large, gets immediately outweighed by the actual results we see in our practice. Nevertheless, the perception of the field varies depending on who you ask about it. So there is a major concern about a lack of evidence for some of things that we do, and perhaps high costs associated with treatments that we offer. And inevitably, we have to deal with every now and then happening outbursts of bad publicity associated with what we do. Most of this is uncalled for, and the doubts about the value of our interventions is not real. However, whenever something of negative nature comes out in press or in scientific literature, it makes sense for us to explain the actual state of affairs and promote the positive attitude towards our interventions. I feel that the main thing that I will be dealing with as a president is not only maintaining the value and positive angle on the entire neuromodulation as a field, but expanding it further, making it more friendly, more acceptable, and more understood by all layers of the society. That involves patients, that involves payers such as insurance companies or governments, that involves the manufacturing companies that produce devices for us, and obviously referring physicians who are deciding whether or not to send their patients for neuromodulation procedures.
So you talk about the field expanding. What are some of the technological or medical advancements that are particularly influential in neuromodulation right now?
There are many. As a matter of fact, right now, as we speak, there is a large conference dealing with innovations in neuromodulation taking place in our venue. The innovations are addressing not only the current needs of the neuromodulation field, but also the future directions of growth. Because we are not only making the devices we use now smarter, smaller, longer lasting, and safer in general, but we also look for new indications for our modalities. So if in the past we were only dealing with few large areas such as pain and movement disorders, perhaps epilepsy and psychiatric conditions, now neuromodulation covers many other subjects. We are covering the topic of pelvic dysfunction with genitourinary or gastrointestinal disorders. We are having devices that offer neuromodulation for treatment of sleep apnea, respiratory dysfunction. We are talking about managing the rehabilitations for patients with spinal cord injuries and other motor disorders. We even talk about using neuromodulation to treat cognitive and behavioral problems like Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. So the list is growing. I mean, we now see examples of neuromodulation being used to treat chronic inflammation or systemic diseases of all kinds. We are seeing the use of neuromodulation for treatment of symptoms related to COVID infection. So all of these things that people could not even think about in the past are now becoming reality. And I'm very pleased to be in the middle of this as a user, as an inventor, as, I guess, a leader in a society which promotes all this.
With all of these different advancements, how do we create focus in terms of getting the message out to the public?
I think there's a lot of work to do in that direction. I think the public has already some basic understanding of neuromodulation, as most people around us are familiar with the concept of both spinal cord stimulation for treatment of pain, or vagal nerve stimulation for treatment of epilepsy, or even deep brain stimulation for treatment of Parkinson's disease. So there are many examples which we do not have to explain to patients anymore. There's a certain degree of perception and basic knowledge that the majority of population already has. What is missing, though, is the convincing all parties in the not only long-term effectiveness of our interventions, but also its safety, its cost effectiveness, its lasting value in maintaining the person's ability to function and enjoy life. We are talking about improvement of quality of life across the board. Pretty much any conditions we're treating rarely translates into loss of life, but the quality of life gets lost early on. And I think if we can recover it partially or completely, then our mission is accomplished.
Would you say that resonates with your personal mission? Or to put it more appropriately, what is your mission? Why are you here? Why are you excited to be part of the INS?
I am a strong believer into everything I do, or I wouldn't do it otherwise. And that's why it's very fitting for me to be part of this entire movement of the society, of this field, because I am convinced that everything we do serves the purpose of improvement of patients' quality of life. I feel that me doing it on a daily basis, seeing patients in clinic, operating on them in my practice, as well as participating in all the society activities is very valuable. I feel that the appreciation that my patients show towards the results of their treatment is definitely supportive of every effort that we put in that direction. I think our ability to change somebody's quality of life is so important that everything else, including the costs, the risks, the invasiveness, is becoming secondary. Now, it doesn't mean we don't pay attention to this, or we don't want to reduce the risks or reduce the costs and make it more attractive for everybody. But in general, the overarching goal of focusing on the patients, on their needs and their overall well-being, I think that's the most important that we don't want to lose. Focusing on the patients and putting patients first, I think it's not just an empty phrase. I think it's something that I use in my daily practice, and I feel that it's the only way for us to justify everything we do.
What about the neuromodulation community itself? You've been in this space for a couple decades now. How have you seen the neuromodulation community evolve?
I think neuromodulation community is very dynamic and diverse group. By working in this field for so long, I had an opportunity to meet people from all kinds of backgrounds. And this involves people from all kinds of geographies. I work with my colleagues from the United States, from Europe, from Latin America, from Asia, from Middle East, all over the world. We have chapters all the way from Australia to Canada, from Russia to Brazil. And we see people coming to neuromodulation with different levels of expertise, different expectations, and different backgrounds. It also allows me to work with people from different specialties, because if a functional neurosurgery society is a very narrow group of dedicated specialists who are super specialized neurosurgeons dealing with very specific aspect of neurosurgery, neuromodulation community is the opposite thing. We have representatives from at least 10 different specialties, and those are pain specialists from anesthesia and rehabilitation backgrounds. These are neurologists dealing with patients with movement disorders. These are psychiatrists who address depression and obsessive compulsive disorder. There's urologists and gastroenterologists who deal with incontinence and other issues affecting the genitourinary or gastrointestinal tracts. We see headache specialists. We see the biomedical engineers. We see pretty much everybody who is one way or another involved in neuromodulation. I'm sure I'm forgetting several important specialties, so please forgive me. But there's the fact that we can work in this multidisciplinary group is already very important, because it's not just the collaboration that we see between different specialties. It's also cross-pollination, because people come with very different views, very different backgrounds, and they come up with ideas that we would not have otherwise. Just this exchange, this formal and informal exchange through the congresses, through publications, through educational events, that's what keeps a society thriving. I feel that the main advantage of the existence of an International Neuromodulation Society is its multidisciplinary nature. I think that what differentiates us from all other specialty medical societies, and it allows us to be at very different level of experience and expertise. I feel that this concept of having a super specialty, so it's not something that deals with narrow niche in one field, but opens up to pretty much everybody involved in this general field of medicine, helps us not only with advancement of current technologies, but also with developing completely new out-of-box type of thinking that comes with different concepts in neuromodulation, different types of invasive and non-invasive devices, with generally different paradigms. Just as an example, general perception about neuromodulation is that's all about electrical stimulators. Now, that's To some extent, it's true. Vast majority of neuromodulation devices we use are indeed electrical stimulators. But neuromodulation is much more than this. Because in addition to electricity, we use chemical neuromodulation when we put in vertical pumps. We use optical neuromodulation when we have optogenetics and photoelectric devices. We use mechanical modulation when we have ultrasound or just a vibration type devices using this. We have temperature-based things when we use cold or heat to change the neural function. And the list is growing. Now we have magnetic, now we have the combination of different modalities in one device and so forth. So there's a fascinating time to be in the middle of this. I feel that the growth and the general enthusiasm in the field is what keeps us running.
When you talk about both the multidisciplinary and multicultural nature of neuromodulation, what's on your mind with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion work? What do you think is the most important that we focus on to create an accessible environment?
This is a very important part of what we do today. I don't like putting frames or labels on what we do. I feel that both diversity and inclusion are inherent part of our international society. We have people coming from all kinds of backgrounds with different things. But in general, the entire concept is merit-based. I feel that people who get ahead are the ones who are most prepared, who are most dedicated, and who are most enthusiastic. This is somewhat unique for me because for many reasons, just the fact that I was born and raised in the Soviet Union and had my medical school in Azerbaijan and had my residency in Russia and then my second residency in Chicago and a fellowship in Oregon. So all of the things bring a very unique perspective for me to look at things happening in the world, in the politics, in the healthcare, and that works to my advantage. I think I can critically look at things that many others take for granted and perhaps come up with some unordinary solutions, and at the same time maintaining flexibility, understanding that one size does not fit all. What works in one country will not work in another one for a variety of different reasons. And that's why I feel that individual approach, just like we use individual approach to every patient we treat, should be also applicable to every part of our society or every member of the society, because everybody's situation and circumstances are different. And that does not make them less or more capable of things. It just makes them more in need of flexible approach. So I'm strongly supportive of this. And I think to keep an open mind dealing with problems coming up our way helps to solve them faster and in a more productive fashion.
I'm curious what you think about access to neuromodulation, particularly because you do have experience in different countries. Can you share a little bit about what you know about what access looks like across the world?
This is a very hot topic for Neuromodulation Society or neuromodulation world in general. The difference in degree of access to different modalities as we use is tremendous. When we talk about certain approaches that are hard to choose from based on the patient's needs, we tend to ignore the fact that there are a lot of parts of the world where neuromodulation is not available at all, mostly for financial reasons. The devices we use are expensive, and healthcare, unfortunately, is not a priority for many countries and even continents. So for us to make the entire field available to all patients in need is a major priority. Right? And that's why quite a few educational events we host or have are intentionally aimed at our future areas of growth. So all the web-based activities that we have are based on free access. And a lot of listeners to our podcasts, journal clubs, or webinars are coming from countries that do not have access to neuromodulation just yet. But the fact that we are training people who will be using them in the future, it makes me very optimistic. I feel that the financial hurdles will be overcome one day and the health will become a priority. And therefore, neuromodulation as a big part of the healthcare will be more accessible to people in need.
You're working in the United States right now in Chicago. I'm curious if you can share a bit about the insurance landscape in the United States.
Insurance space in the United States is a very complex question because, as you're well aware, and most of our listeners are well aware of too, is that there's very diverse landscape of insurance settings. Anything from federal insurance to state insurance to private insurance or to even self-pay abilities of patients is very much intermixed. And the modalities that we use are supposed to be available through all of these paths. But realistically, the presence or absence of regulatory approval significantly affects our ability to offer these treatments to our patients. So whenever any device or procedure becomes fully approved, it still may take some time for it to be covered by a person's insurance. International Neuromodulation Society coordinates this through our national chapters. In the United States, North American Neuromodulation Society, which is the largest chapter of INS, is deeply involved in all the socioeconomic issues. They have a dedicated committee that works on getting approvals and promoting the neuromodulation procedures, offering evidence and data whenever such regulatory approvals are being discussed. We also are fighting for assuring access in underserved area, both in the United States and all over the world, where for whatever reason, either private insurance or public insurance does not feel that neuromodulation is a priority. Trying to illustrate the not only safety and efficacy of our interventions, but also cost efficacy of what we do tends to be most effective way to get this approved. It's one thing when you say, we're going to have an expensive device that we're going to use to treat the patient's condition. That may not be appealing to insurance company. But if you bring the same issue through a different angle to say that using this device will save you so much money on the person's healthcare costs, be that emergency room visits or medications or even the disability status that will be reversed with appropriate use of devices, suddenly makes it much more attractive. I feel that one of the advantages of actually International Neuromodulation Society is this ability to bring experience of one country to the benefit of others. Whenever our chapters are in need of some data or evidence, we would not hesitate to share information from one country to another to help them to get those necessary approvals. The International Neuromodulation Society is overarching entity for our national chapters. And quite a few countries have their own national societies that have access to care or proper insurance coverage or just in general healthcare payments available for neuromodulation modalities as one of their main priorities. And therefore, on the International Neuromodulation Society level, we feel that this is something that is worth discussing, emphasizing, and focusing on in our efforts.
As you come into your presidency, how do we balance that there are so many different conflicting needs? Where is your head at with respect to what you want to prioritize?
I think the important thing is not to lose track of everything that we do. I think to focus on the most urgent needs and prioritizing them is something that I plan to do. But at the same time, keeping an eye on everything else that we do and not losing sight of most futuristic or whatever appears to be least important now, as it may become important later. I feel that one of the priorities of International Neuromodulation Society has to remain education. I feel that focusing on next generation of people who will be treating me and you in the future as we get older, or creating new generation of neuromodulation practitioners who will be advancing the field and creating new devices or new procedures or new paradigms in our treatment is remarkably important. And I feel that with what we do now, the Neuromodulation Society prioritizes education and research. We do have research grants. We have mechanisms for applications to have society support for these things. We collaborate with industry to get some funding for some independent research projects. And in having the congresses like what we have now in Vancouver and the next one that will be in Lisbon in 2026, is something that not only showcases everything we do, but also encourages people to be more focused in their endeavors, to have this ability to share your innovations, your research, your educational initiatives is very important. I think nobody can do it alone. As a group, we have much more strength and momentum to move things in the right direction. And I feel that the goal of Neuromodulation Society and me as its future president is to navigate all this and perhaps help our members, our chapters, our individual members to prioritize all these things based on their unique needs. I've been very fortunate to follow example of many stars in this field who led the society before me, and I will capitalize on this using them as not only role models, but also as advisors and consultants for everything we do. But at the same time, we should concentrate on raising new generation of leaders. And I'm very fortunate to see so many enthusiastic people who are interested in pursuing this. The time when we didn't have enough people to take the torch of leadership is long gone. Right now, we have so many great candidates from different backgrounds and from all parts of the world that it's a fascinating time to be in the middle of this.
Well, and I think that speaks to the impressiveness of your own career that has brought you to the point of being the incoming president of the INS. Can you provide some guidance for folks who might be interested in pursuing leadership opportunities in neuromodulation, what's been the most instrumental for you in getting to this point in your career?
There are several things that I want to think that brought me here. And one of them is persistence. I think once you start doing something, there are many times during your career when you think about changing the focus or moving to a different field, and sticking with the main area of interest tends to be rewarding, because as time goes on, the level of expertise that you develop over the years helps in not only dealing with current problems, but also in being involved with the new frontiers that were not available in the past. So to have this focus and persistence is something that I practice myself and what I recommend to others. The other part is pure luck. I was remarkably lucky in encountering people along my path who were not only friends, but also mentors and role models for me. And the list is so long that I don't want to mention anybody specifically, but they know who they are. And these are the people who helped me getting to where I am now. And from my end, the only thing that I can mention is be receptive to your mentor's advice and understanding the value of experience in pursuing your career or anything else that you do. It makes it quite important. I think listening to your peers and listening to your elders is something that helps. It doesn't put you in the restraints of mandatory following every step that they have, but instead it gives you an opportunity to modify the path to your own unique needs and circumstances. So for me, the alignment of the stars that I mentioned that brought me to neurosurgery continued when I was mentored and trained and guided by many fascinating clinicians over the years. And I learned from each of them, and I love them dearly. And I continue to praise them in all my ventures. I feel that the concept of paying forward and giving the same amount of help to my trainees, my fellows, my colleagues, and my successors will probably be the way to manage this. The ability to maintain enthusiasm about things when things go well or when they don't is very important, because there are many times when circumstances cause not only depression, but severe disappointment in what we do. And you have to have certain inner strength to overcome all this and remain positive and be confident that whatever you do is worth it. I feel that it worked well for me, and I encourage my trainees and colleagues to focus on positive things, as this helps not only us helping our patients, but also helping ourselves.
We're recording today from the 16th World Congress of the INS in Vancouver. And something that I've noticed at these conference events in the neuromodulation space is that sort of fondness you speak of regarding your mentors. There's a sort of collective nature to the neuromodulation community. I hear a lot that people say it feels like a family. Why do you think that is? Because I know it's not necessarily like that in all fields of medicine.
And you'd probably be surprised to learn that it's not unique for neuromodulation. I would assume that pretty much every field of professional life will have certain degree of camaraderie and family-oriented interactions. But here, it's probably more obvious because we're fortunate to have very enthusiastic members. The people who do this tend to be more altruistic in a certain way, because they to dedicate their career to clinical care, to research, to education. That's a noble way to use one's life. So we are surrounded by people who are unique in every possible way and who deserve the maximum praise you can give. As a matter of fact, at this Congress, we are honoring one of the giants in neuromodulation. Dr. Barelat is receiving an award of giant in neuromodulation at Congress in Vancouver. And he was one of the founders of that specialty. He's been a great role model for me. To some extent, I'm following his example, coming from another country and starting a neurosurgical career in the United States from scratch after already being a neurosurgeon in your home country. Dr. Barelat has been a great model for me in many ways. And I'm very excited to see him getting this award, as his name can be identified with neuromodulation. With his decades of experience and a tremendous amount of innovation he brought into the field, I feel that it's the most deserved award that we're giving. He follows a long line of other giants that we awarded and honored over the years. And I can tell you that each and every one of them not only deserves it, but also reflects the rich heritage that the society had ever since its inception. It's impressive to be surrounded by so many good people, the people who are good in what they do, in what they think, in what they promote. And I'm very fortunate to be a part of this.
I'm particularly curious about what you've brought up about innovation. One thing that the INS does to contribute in this way with respect to research is through an innovative research grant. When you look at the sort of applications that come in for a grant like that, how do teams evaluate the viability of a research project?
The topic of grants given by society is very hot for me. I think the regular call for proposals that the society issues has taught me that there's unlimited degree of innovation in our ranks. The only thing I feel sorry about with this entire program is our lack of sufficient funds to sponsor all of these proposals. Every proposal we get is so high in terms of quality and potential impact on the patient's well-being that it is very hard to prioritize them. That's why we don't do it individually. We do it as a group. We have the entire committee looking at every single proposal and grading them relative to each other. So at the end of this ranking process, we come up with the ones who got the most points and they get funded. But the unfortunate outcome is that the others who are probably just as good in every possible way do not have proper support from us, which is something that I feel really bad about. So the hope is that as time goes on, we will have some additional funds that we can spend on supporting more of these research applications and grants. I feel that the future of the entire field in maintaining the innovation. And what we do not have is we do not have shortage of innovators. We have plenty of people who are very interested in pursuing this. And the ideas they come up with, they are fascinating. They're the depth of expertise, the different angles they look at the very common issues are amazing. And it is so difficult to rank them because of very high level in general. So I hope that as time goes on and we have more resources from events like this, we will be able to support more of this research and innovation grants because I think that is our future. You cannot be on the forefront of clinical practice without being involved in research. I'm a strong believer in the fact that research is not only mandatory part of the excellence and success, but also the most promising part. Because without investigating your own experience or the future directions in the field, there'll be no progress. I think the research that I've been involved with is all clinical. I've never been into basic science. I enjoy benefits of other people doing basic and translational research, but myself, everything that I ever done was clinical in nature. And all the patents and books and papers that I've written over the years have to do with this interest in research. So in general, the ability to analyze the data that we produce by helping the patients, ability to investigate new approaches, clinical, technological, even philosophical sometimes, is important because to better understand what we do inevitably translates into better outcomes, to more safe interventions, to more lasting and more efficacious ways to treat the conditions that we're treating. So in functional neurosurgery, that becomes particularly important because we are aiming at minimizing the risks. We do not want to offer patients an improvement in quality of life at the expense of complications. So we want to make sure that everything we do is as safe as possible. And if there is a complication, and unfortunately complications are inevitable, they will happen at some point, that they at least they're mitigated properly, that there's no long-lasting effects and residual deficits that we create. So everything we do is having this in mind. We want to focus on safety, on efficacy, on long-term durability of our treatments. And that kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, because when you put your patient's priorities first, then everything is seen in a different light. And I feel that focusing your research on the patient's well-being is probably the most rewarding part of this entire experience.
One thing that comes up for me as I share about neuromodulation in my own life is I don't think I can get more than 5 steps without somebody asking about Neuralink. And so I'm curious, when we look to the future where we're looking at artificial intelligence and things like this, how do you approach ethics and how we balance ethical considerations regarding the long game of neuromodulation with the immediate progress that we're working toward right now?
I feel that it all matches perfectly. I feel that the ethical limitations in terms of indications or invasiveness of the procedures have to be balanced against the benefits to this particular patient or this particular field or the society in general. And sometimes the physicians have their inner sense of ethical appropriateness, and sometimes they have to look outside for an external help. And we do not hesitate to use ethicists to be involved in decision-making when it comes to prioritization or the actual institutional approval for such research. Pretty much every research we do will go through some kind of review board to determine the appropriateness of research methods, to gauge the risks associated with research, be that the real risks or the perceived risks having to do with confidentiality or the patient's ability to function and so forth. And the basic principles that we use for ethical consideration, they've been around for a long time. So I'm very excited about the innovation, and I feel that the publicity we have around it is helpful. I feel that the fact that people are much more aware now about not only artificial intelligence, but also the brain-computer interface and all the other terminology, which was completely strange in just not the distant past, is now becoming household terms. And therefore, the revolutionary aspect of some of this research and some out-of-box thinking that involved in these new developments is very encouraging. I can tell you more. Recently, we had the World Congress of Neurosurgery, and I was asked to represent stereotactic and functional neurosurgery. And I was there on a podium speaking after my colleagues who were talking about innovation and treatment of brain tumors or aneurysms or head injuries, which are remarkably important topics. And what I told them, I think, somehow resonated with majority of audience. I told them that at one point in the future, we will not be using surgical interventions to treat either tumors or the aneurysms. There will be some less invasive interventions that will prevent them from happening. But one thing we will not be able to prevent completely is aging and development of degenerative diseases. And those include Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease and all kinds of dementias and vascular worsenings. And therefore, there will be need for functional neurosurgeons to come in and help people to either slow down the progress of degeneration or reverse it completely. And therefore, I'm very confident that most people who are not taking seriously what we do today will at some point change their mind, and they'll understand the importance of neuromodulation and functional neurosurgery just from the sheer prevalence of degenerative conditions. As society gets older, as we live longer, the issues of quality of life will become more and more important. And that's why treatment of functional conditions, including pain, movement disorders, cognitive problems, psychiatric conditions, will become a priority. And as such, to have a cadre of people who are well prepared to address this through the years of expertise and experience will be very important. So I'm very happy to be a part of this movement. I want to maintain this level of involvement, and I want to transmit my enthusiasm to the current and future generations of neuromodulators. There is plenty of work for us to do, and there will be never shortage of patients who will need our help.
I love your optimism. And as always, I feel like time flies when I chat with you. So we are at time for today. I want to ask one final question, and that's whether or not there's anything that we missed that you'd just really like to share.
No, I think we covered it all. I think that the most important thing for us will be to make sure that more and more people become aware of what we do. So I'm very appreciative of your efforts in creating these podcasts and in making them in such expert fashion. I feel that as a society moves towards this rapidly and widely available information, to have something like this interview today or similar projects becomes very important. So I look forward to have more interactions with you through this platform or similar outreach events. And I will also encourage all the listeners of this conversation to reach back to me and let me know if they have any questions or if they have any concerns or if they have any suggestions about how to make our work better. Thank you.
I'm really excited to have the opportunity to work with you more. And with that, we'll close the episode for today. Thank you all for listening. Make sure you take a moment to subscribe, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.